Hey guys, it's Chrissy here at Queen City Clay. I'm gonna make a box. Doing kind of a back to basics video here. So I'm sitting here with a really dry slab, and by really dry, I mean that it's not flexible at all. So if I hold it up in the air, it doesn't bend, and if I try to bend it, it will break. So this is really pretty dry. This has been sitting around for ages. I don't even know how long, but if you're rolling a wet piece of clay out, you wanna leave it uncovered. You wanna leave it on a porous surface. So I've got a drywall board, a piece of plywood would work, anything that's gonna suck the moisture out of it. And for anything geometric that you're gonna make, like a box or anything like that, you want your clay to be really pretty dry. That way you're gonna have less warping because you're not gonna be stretching and moving the clay as you work. Whatever shape you cut out will stay that shape. So you're gonna have a lot more success if your clay is really dry. I've got a template here for my box. This is just a 4-inch square that I just cut out. It could be whatever size, it could be a rectangle, doesn't matter. But let's start cutting these pieces out and I'll show you how to put this together successfully. All right, so I'm going to use an X-Acto knife to cut these out just because it's nice and sharp. Also because the clay is so dry, if you're having trouble cutting through it, go ahead and dip your knife in some water, it will help. The other thing you can do if you're a little shaky because this clay is so dry, put a straight edge on the edge of your paper template if you're using paper, and that will help you cut straight lines. So I'm going to cut out 5 of these, 4 sides and 1 bottom. Okay, so I'm going to peel away the scrap instead of like trying to pry these pieces out. I'm gonna have to cut it too to get it to come out. That's totally fine. I will save these for another project, or like if I decide to put a lid on this or something later, I can use these pieces for that. We want to get all the extra stuff kind of out of the way. Make sure everything's cut through. So on some of these, if you saw, I kind of like scored it one time with my knife and then came back through and cut it the second time. I did not use a straight edge on these like I just told you guys you probably should do, and they are not perfectly square. They're a little bit messed up. That's okay. Do as I say, not as I do. Or we'll just try to fix it when we score these and attach them. I've just got some water here that I'm going to use for attaching this clay, even though it's so dry. If you are worried about the dryness of this clay and get everything attached together, you can use vinegar instead. So you can use straight vinegar, or you could use some combination of water and vinegar. 50-50 or more or less vinegar, depending on what you want to do. It doesn't really matter. But now I've got all these pieces here and I am ready to bevel them. So because these are so dry at this point, this is really more like woodworking than clay working. Everything's going to stay exactly the shape that you cut it to. All right, so I am going to quickly, I think I've done this in another video, but I want to quickly show you guys how to cut a miter. If you don't know how to cut a 45-degree angle, it's going to be important for this to become square that all your angles match. So I wouldn't eyeball this. So what I'm doing is I'm getting my clay flush with the edge of my board or the table or any kind of flat line that you have here. I'm going to get a tape measure, and I know that this clay is about 1/4 inch thick. All right, so I'm going to measure in 1/4 inch, make a mark. So I'll mark it there, move down to the other side, find 1/4 inch, make a mark. If my clay were 1/2 inch thick, I'd measure in 1/2 inch. So I've got these 2 marks that I just made in the clay. I'm going to put my tape measure across these 2 marks, and now this angle here between the edge of the board and my tape measure should be 45 degrees. Okay, so I'm gonna see if I can get a better angle of that for you guys. So there's the edge of the board, there's my tape measure, and that's where I'm gonna pull my knife through. Just kind of following the line of my tape and letting the tip of the knife hopefully rest on that board, making a nice 45-degree angle. And I'm gonna do that on 3 sides. So the bottom and the 2 sides of 4 of these is gonna be my walls. And then the bottom piece, the piece that's gonna be the bottom, is gonna get beveled on all 4 sides. So I'm gonna do that really quickly with a bevel cutter so you don't have to watch me do a million bevels. Here's my 45-degree angle. Okay, so here's all my pieces cut out. These 4 have 3 sides beveled. This one's beveled all the way around, so this will be the bottom. I picked the worst one for the bottom, so this was the most off square. But if you use a straight edge, like I said before, or if you use something harder than a piece of paper, a piece of cardstock, or anything that's a little bit stiffer, you'll get a better cut there. The paper is just kind of too wimpy to lean your knife against when you're cutting hard clay like this. So I've just gone through, got everything a little bit wet, just trying to get those edges to soften up a bit. I'm gonna go ahead and score everybody while it's on the table. And actually, I'm gonna score the first time down into the table. So I'm kind of going up and down, and I'm scoring that bottom edge into my board here. Okay, so making really nice deep score marks on these. And I'm gonna do that to everything. So now that everything's scored, we can actually start attaching these things. So I might start with not the bottom piece, but 2 side pieces. Because once these 2 are attached together and form a corner, they'll stand up by themselves. If I'm trying to stand one up on the bottom, that could get a little tricky and unstable. So I want to start with a shape that's going to be stable and hold itself up. So now the 2 parts that I'm going to attach together, I'm going to add some water or vinegar just with my paintbrush and give those 2 sides a rescore. So I've gone this way the first time I scored, so now I'm going to go up and down. All right, they should look really gooey. If they don't look really gooey and really torn up, you need to score them better and add a little more water. So I'm gonna just get these edges together. So I'm looking to see that that corner is coming together. You wanna do it with it sitting flat on the board, because hopefully, if you cut these pieces out all the same size, they will line up on the top, okay? So I've kind of tacked this together, but I'm not gonna seal it. This is not a 90-degree angle right now, but it will be once I get all 4 sides on it. So I'm just gonna kind of keep wetting and rescoring the edges that are gonna come together and go all the way around until all 4 are on there, okay? And now that I've got all these 4 pieces tacked together, now I've got a square, right? And it's actually a square. It's not going into a kind of a weird parallelogram shape where one side's stretched out and the other's not. And that's because I have used such dry clay that there's no chance that I can stretch and warp this clay too much. So before I put the bottom on, I'm gonna get these sides together a little bit better. So I like any kind of a rib with a 90-degree angle, nice flat sides. This clay is so dry that you can use a hard wooden rib on it. So I'm just kind of hitting those sides. And what I'm really trying to do here is go back and forth on the corners and make sure those corners are tacked together, okay? So as I do this, kind of going back and forth, I'm creating this little piece of clay, this like burr that kind of keeps moving back and forth. I'm just gonna take that off with my finger, soften that corner a little bit. Okay, and I'll do that all the way around. I'm not gonna worry about the inside yet. I wanna get the bottom on first, but before I do that, I wanna make sure that these walls are really together. They're not gonna come apart on me when I put the bottom on. Just one side, the other side, kind of back and forth, using this flat edge of the rib on that flat plane of clay. Should keep everything kind of nice and squared up there. And just compressing everything together. Okay, so now I'm ready to put the bottom on. So let's flip this upside down. Hopefully it's nice and flat on the table. That top edge. And then we will wet and score this and this bottom piece here. And hopefully it should fit together like puzzle pieces. All right. Now I know I'm missing a little bit of a corner here where I messed this up earlier. That'll be something I have to fill in later, but I might look at this and see like which one's the most substantial corner, which is probably this one, before I drop this on. So I'm kind of looking at kind of where I've messed this up, where this is a little off, what's the best way to drop this in here. I think this is going to be it. All right, so it should fit nicely right down in there. I'm gonna flip it over, give it a couple taps, make sure it's connected, and then flip it back over on its top, and we'll do that same thing with these edges. So I'll come from the side with that nice flat rib, and then come from the bottom. Really compressing that corner together. Remove that extra little bit of clay with your finger, and I'll go all the way around. Okay, so here's the box. I have cleaned all the little clay scraps off my board by kind of brushing them off with a rib, because I don't want to get all those little chunks from the scoring back down on top of this. So here's the aerial view of my box. You can see these corners aren't really perfect. I'm not sure how well you can see these edges down inside here, but these need just a little bit of work just to clean them up. Some people will coil the whole inside of this box. I'm not really a fan of that. I usually only coil if I've got a gap somewhere. So if you've got big gaps in here, that's probably because these squares didn't get cut out perfectly in the first place, and then you'll have to fill those in with little bits of coil. But I am not going to do that right now. What I'm going to do is take this wooden rib and keep using that 90-degree angle. So I've got this 90-degree angle here. So I can kind of get in this side and scrape up, come in from the other direction and scrape up, and hopefully if your box is square, the edge of this rib will get into that corner and compress it without digging into the corner. Sometimes I'll use something like a paintbrush stick to get into the corner, but what that does is, however wide the end of your tool is, it digs out that amount of clay and might make that corner that much thinner or weaker. So my clay's not super thick, so I'm just going to use this flat tool to kind of try to get in there and compress. So now I've got a compression line there instead of that line where my score marks are. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and do that all the way around. And now what I'm doing is I'm doing the same thing on the bottom edge. So I'm just kind of taking this 90-degree angle, putting it on the inside of the box and scraping, getting that corner cleaned up. You you notice I'm not using a lot of water. I'm not actually using any water. As dry as this clay is, it will stick to itself and it will stay together as long as both of these sides are the same dryness, and as long as I've done a good attachment here. So I don't need a bunch of water. If I add a bunch of water and make this soggy, then I run the risk of making it warp and making it not square. But as is, I mean, it's really pretty square. A lot of the time we see boxes that we make out of clay and they are not very square. I am going to use just a tiny bit of water on this paintbrush, and it's really just damp enough to make it slide. It's not wet, to come back in here and clean up these seams. So I've kind of scraped them with that wooden rib, but now I just want to make sure, kind of erasing any score marks that might be in there, anything like that. So just a tiny bit of water on this paintbrush here. And this paintbrush is a cheap, stiff bristle paintbrush from a craft store. So you want a paintbrush that has hard bristles for this step. Done all four sides. I'm going to go around the bottom. And now as I go around the bottom, I can see where I've got a gap on this side. So I've only got a gap in here. I'm not sure if you can see that down in there or not. But on this side here, I can see a little bit of a gap. And that's not compressing or filling in. So I've got extra space in there to fill. I'm going to put a coil only in that corner where I'm seeing that gap. So the first step of that is to get my scoring tool in there. Make some little score marks down there, somewhere for that coil to live. And then I've taken some of the scrap clay from cutting this box out, and I just kind of had it sitting in a puddle of water, so it's a little bit mushy. It's not super wet like I just took it out of the bag. I don't want to add really wet clay to this. So when I make the coil to put down in there, I just want a tiny, tiny bit of clay. I don't want to put a big Band-Aid on that. I just want to fill in that gap a little bit. So this is just like an itty bitty little bit of clay. All right, something like this. I'm going to dip this in my water. Push it down into where that gap is. And then I'm going to take some kind of a stick tool, kind of whatever I've got around, and I'm going to push it into that gap. So I'm kind of pushing that clay down in there. I need a little bit more. Get that wet. It's kind of stuck on the wall there. I'm just going to push it down with my paintbrush. Get it pushed into that gap. Take off this little extra piece. Put it on this side. Push it into that gap. Give it a smooth with the paintbrush. And then I'm going to come in here with my wood rib again. And use that 90-degree angle to make everything nice and square. All right, so now there's no gap in there at all. You would never have known that there was an issue there. All right, so anywhere you see a little gap, you're gonna just do a little coil like that. Don't go crazy on it. And then I'm gonna also do that at the top. So you can see at the top here where my corners are coming together, they're not perfect. So I might add a little score mark on those corners. Again, there's just that little itty bit of clay. Get it wet. Kind of mash it into the corner there. Make another tiny coil. Get it into these corners here. And then I'll scrape off anything extra. So I'm going to use this wood rib again. Trying to maintain that flat, sharp edge. Come in here and get these corners all cleaned up and matching. Okay, got a little bit of a discrepancy here where this side is higher than this side. Let me just scrape that down a little bit. So I'm scraping on the high side. And then I'm going to come in on my low side, score, and we'll add just a little bit more clay there. So I'm kind of mashing that in there. Take this rib, smooth it in. Reinforce that angle. All right, and you would have never known I had a low spot there. All right, and then the only other thing to do on this would be to get your fingers wet and just run them around that rim. So I'm kind of pinching and pulling. I'm not trying to round the rim. I just want to soften these corners so they don't chip. This is also a good way if like this is thicker than this, then you can pinch this side in that's a little bit heavier and make them match visually even if one of your sides looks thinner or thicker. And that can happen if you're using the edge of your clay. The edge of your clay is always going to be thinner than the middle of your clay. So if one piece got cut out of the middle and one edge got cut out of the side, you might have a little bit of a discrepancy there in the thickness of your clay. But I can just pinch a little harder on the sides that look thicker and get those to even out. All right, there she is. There's not a lot of cleanup to do on this because we use those hard slabs and we kept our rib clean the whole time, so that's that.